Okay. Can everybody hear me clearly? My broadcasting microphone.
Wonderful. Looks like the attendees are starting to log in. We're very excited to have everybody here for our colorful conversation. I just want to clarify that this is being recorded for our YouTube. So if you have to jump off for any reason, you're welcome to visit the West Hartford Chamber's YouTube page later on to revisit the discussion. And then we do have both the chat and the Q&A functions enabled. The chat is more of an audience participation. So if you have a comment you'd like to share either to our panelists about the discussion or to each other, feel free to drop it in the chat. But if you do have a question you'd like to pose to our panelists as part of the discussion, please put that in the Q&A box instead. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to West Hartford Chamber's President and CEO, Chris Conway.
Thank you, Kate, and good afternoon, everybody. As Kate mentioned, my name is Chris Conway. I'm the President and CEO of the West Hartford Chamber, and I'm happy to welcome you here today. I'd like to just start off briefly by thanking our program sponsors, Comcast Business and Liberty Bank, for their support of our Colorful Conversations series. Colorful Conversations is facilitated by our Minority Business Network, which is a committee of the Chamber of Commerce. It was founded in 2020 by a group of West Hartford Chamber members and was conceived as a means of providing visibility, networking opportunities, and resources to Chamber members who are also members of underrepresented racial, ethnic, and religious populations. All members should approach participation with a willingness to help achieve the stated objectives of the committee. The mission is to help connect members with opportunities, connections, and resources. And their three pillars are increased visibility of minority-owned businesses, provide discussion forums for the unique challenges faced by minority professionals, such as Colorful Conversations, and increase diversity of our chamber membership. You can learn more about the Minority Business Network on the West Hartford Chamber's website, whchamber.com, under the committee tabs. I would now like to introduce our moderator for today, Yvonne Alston. She is the Chief Cultural Architect, CEO, and founder of Indelible Impressions. Yvonne is an unapologetic, authentic amplifier and advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. She established Indelible Impressions Consulting to advance important conversations, education, and competencies to help organizations understand the importance of culture and its impact on the human experience. Her firm and team focus on challenging systems of inequity, championing dimensions of diversity, and driving inclusive practices holistically. It is my pleasure to turn the camera and mic over to Yvonne Alston.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here on behalf of the West Hartford Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Minority Business Network. So with that, I would like to welcome our illustrious panelists who have the combination of big hearts and brilliant minds. Thank you for joining this colorful conversation titled DEI, Intentional and in Every Space. Welcome, Nicole Miller, founder of Equity Corps Group. Hello, Nicole.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today, Yvonne.
Yes, we're so glad that you're here. Jason Jakubowski, President and CEO of Connecticut Food Share. Welcome.
Hi, Yvonne. How are you? Very happy to be here with everybody today.
I'm good. It's going to be a great discussion. And of course, Adrienne Billings-Smith, Equity Coordinator for the town of West Hartford. Welcome, Ace.
Thank you so much for having me, Yvonne, and the Chamber. I'm so excited to be here and have this discussion with this amazing group of people.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's just get into it. Ace, I'm going to kick this conversation off with you. As we know, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts have really run the gamut since the murder of George Floyd and the racial reckoning that we saw ripple across America. You are doing a lot of work with the community building, community conversations, and support in West Hartford specifically. What has that looked like in your work? What's been going on and what have you been hearing?
That's So big question, but you know, when I started my organization before I came to the town of West Hartford, inside the building with concerned parents of color of West Hartford, now Greater Hartford, exactly what you're saying. After the racial reckoning that was happening across the country, and people trying to figure out how to belong, how to be seen, how to be heard. We were able to start offering mental health services through group talks, and also through community building, through those conversations with families of color. And those same things are still happening. Now we're getting more specific as these years have passed, since the beginning of Concerned Parents of Color West Hartford. Issues are getting more specific for parents and families, and what they want and how they want to advocate for their children. So it's been an interesting transition where we were having these big, broad conversations about multiculturalism and what equity was and what belonging was, and now really digging in and talking about the needs of our community and our children. And I think that's just goes to show that people are really committed to this work, and they want to continue this work. It's not going anywhere, and they're seeing where it fits in for them and their family. So it's been really gratifying to see community members. You know, one of my sayings is, I don't need you to move a mountain, I need you to pick up your rock. And to watch community members do that has been so gratifying and wonderful, to see people really dig into it, for sure.
That's fantastic. And when I think about galvanizing community together, right, across all of the dimensions of diversity, lived experience, professional experience, are you finding that galvanizing across those dimensions is relatively easy, or is it a bit more like, I know it's one rock at a time, right? But I'm thinking what I just asked you is probably a pretty big boulder.
Yeah, well, you know, now being in from transitioning from council, so community organizing, to council, into a political space, into municipal government, has been kind of cool to watch the development. You know, our job, and for me at least, I won't speak for everyone, is to meet people where they're at in their journey, right? So I'm all for challenges, and it is a boulder, but at the same time, when people recognize how they affect change and how change affects them, then they're more willing to be a part of the work. So I've watched that happen through just any place that I've been able to do this work, and especially here at the town of West Hartford, employees starting to dig in. And for me, this space, being in the actual building and being a servant to the community in a different way, has been great, because it's my job to make sure that our resources are equitable, to make sure that voices are being heard, that citizens and residents know that they have a space to depend on. There's an accountability piece to it, but watching leadership really actually delve into it and believe in it and make it a part of the mission, it echoes out into the community. So you're seeing it every step of the way, the movement of West Hartford, from the community level to kind of these more formal spaces, for sure.
Great. And speaking of equitable resourcing, right, Jason, this is right, an easy softball right over to you for Connecticut Food Share. So somewhat of a similar question, in that since the murder of George Floyd and the racial reckoning, what impacts do you feel like that has had on the communities in which you serve and the manner in which you serve them?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, anything that brings about a reckoning of this nation's original sin is definitely something that is positive. I mean, it's about time that we reckon with these things. I worry sometimes that we get into this, that, you know, and again, it's recent history. It's not necessarily long history yet, but I don't want us, as a society, to draw this artificial, to think that the murder of George Floyd was this artificial line in the sand. I mean, I think we have to begin with the premise that that was simply a one of many incidents, one of many symptoms of a problem that's been plaguing this United States for 247 years now. So, I mean, I start with that premise. That said, Yeah, has there been a what we would call a societal reckoning? Has there been a increased focus on a lot of on a lot of these types of issues in the last several years? Yes, absolutely. And how it affects us here, I think there's two things. First of all, it has definitely brought more awareness. It can't possibly have brought less awareness. I mean, you look at it, especially around that time. I mean, it was present. It was in people's faces. It was everywhere. But there was an acknowledgement from everybody, from boards of directors of large corporations to boards of directors of nonprofits to leaders of those organizations that, okay, hey, we are now aware of this. We have to do something about this. We have a corporate, nonprofit, societal, whatever responsibility. So I think that's one of the effects. I think the other effect on a more practical standpoint is it has created environments of less tolerance for things that, quite frankly, might have been tolerated in the past. I will tell you, in the past, there might have been things that people might have said, that employees could have said, that maybe you get a warning, maybe you get a couple of strikes before you get thrown out. In the last couple of years, I mean, we've had to terminate more than one employee for using racial epithets in the workplace. I'm not convinced that 10 years ago, and again, I wasn't here 10 years ago, but I mean, I'm not convinced 10 years ago, that's an automatic, hey, there's zero tolerance for that. So I do think that we have created a culture of less tolerance. And that, I think, is a very positive thing.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because I would imagine as well for Connecticut Food Share, those who are recipients of some of the goods that you provide in various ways. And obviously we know that during the height of the pandemic, you had all of these really big events at Rensselaer Field and other areas in which to distribute to families in need. And what that looked like probably 10 years ago looked very different at the height of the pandemic. Yeah. Who the makeup of who was in need probably was not the same demographics 10 years ago as it is today. Can you speak a little bit about that before I segue over to Nicole?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think, we are on we are on this DEI journey, and we call it a journey, and we're happy to be on it with you, Yvonne, in your team. It's twofold here at Connecticut Food Share. First of all, there is we have a covenant to our employees as an employer to address diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace. The second piece for us, though, is that we're serving a very diverse state, and we're serving very diverse communities out there in the state. So it's not just about us wanting to be a diverse workplace. It's about how do we interface with a very diverse state like the state of Connecticut. And to your question about what the pandemic showed us, I think you got a couple of different things. First of all, you saw the number of individuals of color who were food insecure skyrocket during that period of time. There is a wider disparity now than there ever has been. The interesting thing is, you go to, for the people that were at Rensselaer Field, or the people that were at a lot of our food lines during the pandemic, it was the first time, at least in my lifetime, that you also saw a lot of college educated, suburban, employed people dealing with food insecurity. And we heard the story over and over again. Hey, I have a college degree. I had a 5 or 6 figure a year job. Due to no fault of my own, the rug was pulled out from under me. I went through my savings in 2 weeks. And now what do? Do I, pay for my kids' medication? Do I pay for my house? Do I pay for my electricity, or do I pay for food? So you really, in many ways, COVID was kind of a great equalizer in that it showed we all are human. And that's I think that was a real wake-up call for a lot of people here in a state like Connecticut.
Yeah. And I think part of that wake-up call is what I often refer to, and folks at Indelible, as the collateral beauty of COVID, right? Is that it allowed us to come together in ways that bridged across various divides in our society because we were all battling with it. That said, frontline workers, as you noted, it highlighted further the greater disparities within certain communities. And so, Nicole, I think that's a great point for you to enter the convo here. How did that season impact client work at Equity Corp? And what was the trajectory of what you were seeing with early commitments, right? DEI, DEIB commitments from clientele?
Yeah, sure. No, thanks for pulling me in. I think as both Jason and Ace have really spoken to, is that this work has been ongoing, right? There's an evolution that has been part of DEI work because it is a journey. Like Jason said, this is a journey. This is something that will never end. I think what has happened and what I'm seeing with clients as well as within the higher ed space is really an opportunity to be able to highlight and focus more directly some of the common issues that we've all been plagued with over the years. I also think many clients are really starting to take a look inward. And I think that's the piece that has been the greatest shift. I started in this work 25 years ago at Watkinson School. And we were talking about multiculturalism. And now what we're doing, and you heard both Jason and Adrian also speak to the identity and awareness that is also part of this work, recognizing that diversity is more than just race, it's more than just gender, it is that intersectionality and the multiplicities that we all bring. And I think that really what happened with the death and murder of George Floyd. And then when you pair that with COVID, all we had to do was watch it and look at it, and we could no longer ignore it. I can recall thinking about how interesting it was that you now had conversations on nightly news with Brian Williams saying that systemic racism is real. And for those of us who've been in the work, we're basically saying, well, yes, it is real. It's been real. Thinking about the hundreds and hundreds of years that we have been grappling with these challenges. And so I think, with Equity Core Group, as well as with Goodwin, it allowed us not only as a firm to be able to help clients, but also to start to prepare students to enter into diverse workspaces, which is really where this work should begin. Employers should be receiving college graduates who've started the work.
Right.
So thinking about it from the cyclical perspective, where does it start? It starts within the education.
Yeah, I love that because I have always felt like as a DEIB practitioner that that's so key. Because eventually, right, these individuals that go through the school systems may end up working at organizations that then become our clients. So the earlier that we can impart the awareness, and I like to take it a couple steps further all the time, right? Like awareness is great, but can we get to action and accountability? Those two other A's, because I have found through indelible impressions clientele that sometimes awareness is where people are most comfortable. And as we all know on this panel, when people get too comfortable, then perhaps we're not pushing hard enough, right? Perhaps that we are not having the conversations that put us into a space that really help us change and transform in how we feel, in our thinking, and thus our behaviors across our lived and professional experiences. So I really appreciate that, starting with folks at an early stage, right? And impacting that in really important ways. So as a DEIB practitioner, I really do believe that every person who champions DEI or DEIB in work or in the community should have a personal why that really drives them beyond what many have said is like the moral imperative for doing this work. If you feel comfortable answering, and anybody can kick it off, what is your why? And really, how has that impacted how you show up in the work and in community?
I'll start. My why is very easy. I have a 10-year-old son and a 13-year-old niece who have to traverse this world. So for me, just even when starting CPCWH, that was my why. So being in this work every day that I go home and I look them in their eyes, I want them to know that people are working toward a better world for them, and that they're in it and they have their own journey in this world, right? My son's biracial, and they have their own work that they have to do because they're going to come across so many different sorts of people in their world. They have to be able to navigate their world also, but also hold people accountable and be able to advocate for themselves. So I think my why is just very easy and very like to the core foundation of where my heart lies and why I do this work. Because when I go and I, I'm the sort of person where family isn't just blood also. So when I look to the next person, their child sitting next to me, I want the world to be better for them also. So what does that look like? And I love that Nicole talks about education and those pieces and getting as young as possible, having these conversations, because these conversations are important and they're real. And lived experiences don't start when you're 18. Lived experiences start from the day you're born. So that's why we need to continue to have these conversations. And you can call it whatever, DEIB, you can call it whatever you want. It really comes down to the sectionality of folks and how people live and how people live amongst each other and understanding different cultures and this, that, and the other. So making your children aware, that's why I said my why is always going to be them. And that gets me up each and every day to do this work.
Fantastic. All right. Another panelist.
Yeah, I could say,
sure.
I'll go the opposite direction. I mean, Ace mentioned her, the next generation. I would say for me, I mean, a lot of it is my parents and is how I grew up as a kid in New Britain. And it's just how my brother and I were raised. I mean, my mom was a social worker at New Britain General Hospital. Our dad was a longtime school teacher, principal in New Haven, and then in New Britain, and a youth baseball coach. It's just how we grew up. I mean, we grew up in a diverse community that in which we were able to see firsthand some of the net effects of poverty and of discrimination and of centuries of that, whether it be through food insecurity among our friends and classmates, whether it be through, grew up in the early 90s. I mean, gun violence was a major problem in cities all across America. So for me, I think that's it's what was instilled in me by my parents, and I think it's instilled in both my brother and I. It's why, and I'll also put in a plug here for West Hartford. It's one of the reasons when my wife and I were got married, looking for a place to raise our family. That was one of the main attractions of West Hartford for us. I mean, we are raising or have raised I guess we're continuing to raise our 5 children here in the town of West Hartford. It's an incredibly diverse town with an incredibly rich cultural acumen. And to me, that's a choice. That was a choice that we made based on, how we were raised. So.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So it's looking forward while also looking behind. And I think that's really important. Yes, Nicole.
Yeah, I was just going to nestle my comments right here in the middle, right? From the future, looking at the past and really looking at today, right?
Yeah.
I get up every day to do this work because I know there are people who are interested in discovering who they are in relationship to the work. I had a very interesting upbringing, being raised in a predominantly white environment. I was the only one for many years, and recognizing that there were times that I didn't understand who I was as a Black person in that space. I think there is real credence to today's experiences of people of color within the workplace. I enjoy engaging white folks in this conversation because there is some reflection that needs to be done. I enjoy being able to also challenge people of color to address the biases that we hold. recognizing that no one is immune to biases, no one is immune to the prejudices that we hold. However, we have a responsibility to explore. We have a responsibility to investigate the obstacles that impede us from being able to build relationships. And so, you know, I do this work for myself. I do this work for people who enter into workspaces every day, and for students who are coming into our school system, as well as employers and employees who are going to be really helping to shape the experiences of clients and customers and patients. So I'm going to nestle my comments right there in the middle.
Fantastic. And I will just add my why for this into the mix, and that is actually interesting. It is a compilation of all three of your responses, which, audience, for the record, I did not know ahead of time. So I just wanted to say that this is live learning, if you will. For me, it was looking at my own experience as a Black woman, as well as that of colleagues over the history in which I was in corporate America for many, many years, and being frustrated by that, conversations that didn't take place, people who didn't seem very interested in having a conversation, weren't interested in awareness, and doggone sure weren't interested in action or accountability. And so the ability to do that was very important to me. Looking at my own child, my own daughter, yes, wanting to make the world better than how it has been, and hopefully to leave some meaningful legacy in the earth of not just being in a position to make more money or make organizations more wealthy, but to actually do something that had a ripple effect across generations. And then certainly for the now, right? Indelible has the blessing, and I do consider it a blessing, to serve clients across industries and geographies. We love our nonprofit clients. We love our for-profits. We love our school system clients and safety organizations. And it really is focused on trying to more deeply understand the human condition, right? Because that is the same for all of us, no matter the different identities that intersect within us. And how do we have conversations and have acknowledgements that bridge us closer together in what we share that is very common to all of us, which is that humanity? How do we lift that up? How do we examine that, or even interrogate that to a certain extent, and then do something very meaningful with it that has impact, that helps to achieve outcomes, that drive down these disparities, that help to mitigate some of the biases that every single human being has for multiple reasons. And so I love that all three of you, and adding in my fourth, we all have a lot of intentionality that goes into us, that drives both the passion and the purpose behind the work. I'd just like to, before I ask the panel another question, mention Jennifer in the chat, who said, initially I wanted to have these important conversations with my kids and for my job, but as I become more educated, I'm trying my best to look through situations through a lens of systemic racism. And so thank you, Jennifer, for bringing that out, because what we are talking about in these different areas that both Jason, Nicole, Adrienne, and myself work in is about systems, ultimately, right? So whether it's the education system, whether it's food systems and food insecurity, and state, local, state, federal systems, as well as just some of the core tenets that our society have been built upon, it always goes back to systems. And part of the reason that we've seen the longevity, certainly, of this problem is because it is systematic and it plays into all these different areas of life. So while there is this perspective around, well, slavery was hundreds of years ago and Jim Crow was so long ago, why are we still talking about it? We're talking about it because all of those things, all of the things that we're dealing with today have its roots going back to those seasons of time and of life and the systems that were built and born out of it, right? It extends even into policing and all of these other areas, which is why we are having the challenges that we're having today. So taking the opportunity to look at it through the lens of systems, right? And how do we build better systems? How do we become advocates and I even dare say accomplices to this work to change the system so they're better for everyone, so everyone can realize the benefits of our Constitution and our amendments and all of the rules that govern society. It benefits all of us, no matter how you identify. So I know I got on my soapbox a little bit there, but as you could tell, I'm very passionate and purposed about this. Do our panelists want to add anything, any additional comments to what I said?
I think you said it pretty well.
Well, thank you. All right. Andre said in the chat, we are so thankful that we have champions like all of you to help us grow and further navigate. You all rock. Thank you, Andre, from Leadership Greater Hartford. All right, Nicole, I'm going to pivot back to you. What are you hearing from your stakeholders as it relates to their needs being met? As it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion? You work with clients, you also work in school systems. Help us to understand what you're hearing from folks.
Sure. I appreciate that question a lot because I think it continues that dialogue of that evolution and that journey. There's the idea of taking it from your head and putting it into your hands, right? We talked about, we can philosophize about these topics until, the cows come home, or we can finally start to address many of these issues that start from within. And sometimes that's the hardest part. And so I've engaged in, different workshops, one recently with Leadership Greater Hartford, really helping people to move beyond the book list, right? There was a huge, resurgence of book clubs that came out shortly after the murder of George Floyd. And everyone has, oftentimes will tell me about their bibliography, right? They'll roll out their works cited page. And I will then often ask, well, what are we doing every day? And so stakeholders are really looking to move the work from the book list to their everyday interactions. So thinking about the comment that Jennifer made, like, how do you have these conversations? Parents are looking for ways to be able to engage in conversations. You have school teachers who are looking for opportunities to be able to improve their curriculum. A lot of my dissertation work is really looking at how do we integrate cultural competence into the workplace. Stakeholders are also looking to identify how to unpack their own unconscious biases. Like, how do you do that? It takes a lot of work. It is a process. It's not something that happens overnight, and it's also not a checkbox. So once you've identified one, that does not mean that you don't have further work to do. I would also dare say I've done some work with faith-based organizations, and you have people who are really starting to consider and think about, some of the images that they have been surrounded by, and how that also informs how they see people, how they value others, and whose story has been included and whose stories have been excluded. So I think that there are a variety of different areas that folks have been looking for opportunities to engage in conversation. Great work is coming out of Avon with Avon Friends for Equity, and they're doing some great work within their local school system and really starting to challenge the status quo. So I would say that, people are looking for opportunities to explore themselves. How can they engage their family members in this conversation, as well as how do they better prepare themselves and their employees to be able to engage in this conversation?
Thank you for that answer. And I think you touch on something that Indelible Impressions is very attuned to with our clients, is not just having the conversations and imparting knowledge, but skills, right? Because people need to know more than definitions and premises and principles, right? They need to know, how do I skill build around this? How do I build my capabilities with this, and with different audiences as well? Because as I often say, this should go with you everywhere your foot shall tread. So for example, in Indelible's clients, we're working with organizations like Jason's Connecticut Food Share in the workplace. But Jason, you've heard me say many times, but this needs to go home with you. This goes into your homes. This goes into your neighborhoods. This goes into your communities. And this is how we impact society for the better. This is how we are inclusive as fellow journey people towards a better, more inclusive society that allows us to engage in a meaningful way with one another. Jason, do you want to add anything to that in terms of your stakeholders, right? Whether that's within the walls of Connecticut Food Share or outside of it as it relates to their needs being met? How are you all incorporating DEI into that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we had said, I know we had said to you when we were interviewing firms, to DEI firms, and one of the things that our board had said when we created our own community impact plan, and this was a piece of it, this was not going to be a check the box exercise for us. And I think that we've all probably at some point in our life participated in those check the box exercises where, okay, somebody's going to come in here and they're going to give you a piece of paper and you're going to do this little exercise, and everybody's going to sit down, everybody's going to stand up, and everybody's going to hug. And then at the end of it, we're going to say, okay, great, we're all diverse now. Wonderful. That is not what we were looking for. And we want to make sure that this is something that is systemic. If I wanted, if my board and I were interested in that, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of web applications we could have used to enforce everybody to complete a little webinar with a few checkoffs. This is, and again, you framed it, Yvonne, as a journey, and we like looking at it as a journey because this is something that's going to be with us for many years. This is not something that that we're looking for people to leave at the door when they're here. This is something that I think we're looking to make not just change in the workplace, but I mean, societal change as well.
Yeah. And that's why I think, I've certainly always felt that, yes, the head is important, but it is the heart that is the place of sustainable change, right? Because when we get it down in our heart space, we really understand and we feel and we think and we act differently as a result. So there has to be this place that it becomes implanted in both. Ace, would love to hear your perspective on this as well from your stakeholders in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and thank you, Nicole and Jason, for your words. And I was just shaking my head, nodding my head the entire time, because when I think about it, I think I said to someone actually yesterday in conversation, I said, when you're coming to a consultant or whomever and you're saying, I want to do this work, right? It can't be a checkbox. I told him, I said, it has to become a habit. So every single day, it may start off as a checkbox for some, and we have to be realistic in that, right? But it has to become a habit because it has to be embedded and ingrained in every single thing that you do. Every single decision that you make, it's a part of it. That's how your thought process should be until you no longer have to check a box to know that you've hit a point. And that's how you build it into your own systems and your own organizations. I also was thinking about things going on here, the town of West Hartford, and kind of building out what workshops will look like, and capacity building is what you want to do within organizations. So it's not me doing the training or facilitating the training. It's bringing in folks and having these conversations. And again, meeting people where they're at is so important, because if I decide what you're going to listen to today, I'm only going to get 2 people who are really going to be interested. But having people go, okay, like the evolution of language I talk about a lot. There are things you could say before, there are things you can no longer say. And that's happening throughout your whole life. And there are things that are happening, things and words are being created daily, and terms and identities and all these things are happening around us. And I just tell people, no matter what your thoughts are, the world will still turn and the world will still evolve just as words will. So we have that conversation about, it's not about the definition of a word. Again, it's about the impact of that word, how the word impacts you and how you impact it or affect it. So those are the conversations in how to engage with folks who have no time.
Yeah.
So we can do these hour-long things or 2, or 6 months worth or whatever, but different ways to engage in different mediums, because we talk about, and I love that Nicole's in the educational, people have different different ways of learning. So
Yes.
a 30-minute quick hitter where they're fully engaged in doing something may be more impactful than them having to sit there for an hour and listen to someone talk at them. So those are kind of the things that go through my mind and what we're trying to do here at the town, and how we have that internal piece, but externally, how are we getting out to our community, ensuring that their voices are being heard and their needs are being met through cultural competency work, and through elevating voices and really listening to the needs of the community. And that's really important for my office and where I sit, internally and externally, doing both of those things simultaneously, which is hard. But if you don't meet, that's what I like. It's hard.
Yeah.
But it's all of that matters, because we're talking about impact. You're talking about heads and hearts and hands. And at the end of the day, it's that impact and what you're able to imprint on someone as well.
Ooh, sounds like an indelible impression. Wonder where that came from. But that's exactly why, Ace, and I'm looking over and seeing Dawn Ennis's comment in the chat. Yes, Ace, exactly. Impact. Hey, Dawn, we both know Dawn. I actually with Dawn. Fun fact. Yeah, I think it's really important. If we are not outcomes driven, if we are not looking to measure progress so that we can actually say we started here, but now we're here, are we really affecting change? If policies don't change, if people don't change, if incidences of police brutality for Black people and those rates of incidences don't change, like, what are we doing, right? We can't just talk about it. We have to be about it, but we have to be focused as well on decreasing certain aspects, certain things that we're measuring, certain efforts that we're measuring to make sure that it's happening. And it's happening on that continuum. To the point about it being a journey, there's no end, and there doesn't need to be an end, because we should all be, one, evolutionary beings, where there's something we learn today that makes us better tomorrow, more intelligent tomorrow, that, as you pointed out, Ace, go from everyday habits to who we are, which is very important, right? So as we're doing things, if we're looking at life and situations and experiences through that equity lens, and the more that we do that, it becomes systematic and intuitive within us, so that we can more readily identify the disparities when we see them. We can call a thing, and we can drive that action and accountability in ways that don't always need to be contentious, but can be informative and can be transformative, right? And I think that's a huge facet of this. We do have some questions, private questions that have come through that I would like to read off and see if the panel would like to engage in that conversation. Stephen said, would love to hear the thoughts on the recent and huge Supreme Court decision on affirmative action in our schools and universities, and how we feel that decision might affect whether or not companies will still feel the necessity of DEI as an effort, initiative, imperative. So I know that's a hot one.
I don't mind chiming in on that one. this decision, I think it rocked us, right, as a society. I think,
Yeah.
and I've had opportunity to listen to both sides. Like, I really take time to listen to both sides. I wanted to make sure that I was clear with what was being said, by SFFA. And I think that this work is always going to have to be done regardless of what laws are in place, right? So that's not going to stop us. If anything, it's just going to cause people to double down, right? And I think, I see all the head nodding, right?
Mhm.
I think that we also have to recognize that there are areas of the decision that weren't necessarily highlighted. So for example, if you look at race for military academies, race can still be taken into consideration, which then leaves me to pause, right? So why can it be taken in consideration there? However, the decision also stated that universities can take into consideration how race has impacted someone's life. So I think what's going to end up happening, and what I think it's important for college counselors to pay close attention to, as well as parents, is when crafting essays, when going into interviews, really being able to highlight their experience, life experience was a huge piece of the decision, and talking about how race and how that experience can't always be taken into consideration. But I do think that as we move forward, you're going to see some universities like Goodwin, who are not going to, change their, we're an open enrollment institution, but we will continue to do this work. And continue to, have a community of belonging where students know that they will get the necessary education to be able to make marked change within their future workplaces. So when thinking about that part of the question about how's it going to impact employers, we live in a diverse country, and employers and workplaces should reflect who they serve. And so as our society continues to shift and evolve in terms of its racial and ethnic demographic, workplaces have a responsibility to ensure that there's representation. So this should not cause employers to shy away. If anything, employers should take more concerted effort to ensure that their employees are getting the necessary professional and personal development to continue to serve their communities.
Yeah, which are becoming more global day by day. Ace.
I'm just gonna piggyback right off Nicole. As a lawyer, it rocked my world, but that's just because I'm looking at precedent and what's going on with the decisions that have been coming down the pike. But as someone in this business and in this work, the bottom line matters. And I'm just going to be very realistic in that. And exactly what Nicole's saying, and what you said, Yvonne, and saying becoming more global, becoming more ethnically and racially diverse, because, these things matter, and they matter for the bottom line. And money talks. And when there's data that has been proven that the more diverse employee population you have, the better you are, the better your bottom line. So when I go to that route, then this work, like Nicole said, like Yvonne said, people are going to double down in this work. And to think that places like Harvard or UNC or Yale didn't have something in place and did not recognize what was coming down the line based on what they've seen the Supreme Court do, they have plans in place, right? There are already plans in place. You saw that with student loan debt. Like, people are recognizing that it's not, we have a government, but we also have an accountability factor that negates what the government does and what the Supreme Court does. And again, you must have a reflection of who you serve. And I think, and I love that you say that, Nicole, and that's so true. So I think that it doesn't change how schools, it might change for some schools, but I don't see it changing for very many schools on how they go about bringing people into their institutions, because they want that. And they've been doing it for a long time now. It's become a habit, right?
Yes.
it's a part of their system and their policies and procedures. So for
Right.
me, yeah, as a lawyer, that's like your heart hurts for things that are happening. But as just seeing and really looking at it and going, okay, this is what's going to happen next, and knowing that these things are going to be the things were already in play with an expectation of maybe this decision. I feel confident in this work, and people, again, it's proven well for people's bottom line. It's proven well for our society, period.
Yes. Yes. And I think many academic institutions in higher ed, they understand the value of it, right? And so we saw that, I think, with responses from the president of Harvard. We're seeing it responses from other schools like Wesleyan, which Dawn dropped in the chat there, right? That is very important, is that these schools are saying, oh, no. We understand the ruling, but we also understand the value to our institutions, to the lived experiences of our students, and how that grows them further into adulthood, and how this will transform them in a way, and their engagement with a more global community, so that when they get into the organizations and they go to work for someone, they've already sharpened that skill set, that tool set, and they will desire it in the workplace. And certainly that is what we're seeing even prior to this ruling, is that more millennials and from millennials forward are saying, no, diversity, equity, inclusion need to be foundational within your organization, or I'm not interested in coming to work there. I'm not interested if you have a leadership team that is homogeneic, right? And everybody looks the same, and it's, potentially all one gender dominated, or there's very little mix there, right? In terms of those things, they want it because they understand the value. Jason, I want to pass the mic to you and see what you have to say on this.
Yeah, I personally agree with everything that Ace and Nicole had said on this. I guess the more pessimistic view I look at this is, the day after the Supreme Court decision came down, I was talking with a group of people, and somebody said, well, now that affirmative action is illegal here in the United States. And it's like, okay, that's the takeaway for some people. And I don't know. I mean, yes, the reverse comment would be that, oh, we're elitists because we're educated. Ace, you happen to be a lawyer, so great. You understand how to read those Supreme Court decisions. I think we've got to recognize that there is a yin and a yang here. I mean, there are people who, as we may have been upset about that decision, there are people who are cheering in the streets and saying that, hey, this is the greatest thing that happened. It's over. It's over. It's okay. It's not over. So I do think that takeaway and how some, especially large companies, especially colleges, universities, how they how they put that into practice. If a company wants to say, hey, sorry, we're ending our affirmative action policy, our affirmative action program now because the Supreme Court says it's illegal, they're going to do it. It's not the right thing to do. They certainly shouldn't do it. But if they've been looking for cover, they might have a little bit of cover right now. The key for me is what Yvonne was just talking about, is people, voting with their feet, people voting with their wallets. And I look at these millennials, at this younger generation, and I always say, I mean, again, I have 5 teenagers, and they're the ones that generation is the one that are going to save us. They are making those types of decisions. They're the ones that are going to that I'm counting on to say, I'm sorry, I don't care how much money you're offering me. I don't care how many benefits you're offering me. I am just not going to work at a organization that doesn't believe in X, Y, and Z. That's what it's going to take to ensure real change on this issue. I think it's a very simplistic view that a lot of people have, that, oh, affirmative action's over. Very, very, very a simplistic view of things. So it's up to us as leaders of organizations to continue to push for and fight for the things that we need. And it's up to people who are going to work at organizations to say, yes, yes or no. I'm sorry, I can't work for an organization that doesn't believe in these things.
Yeah.
Or I can't
And
go
I
to
think,
a college. I can't go to I don't care how
yeah.
much scholarship money you're offering me and how great your football team is. I'm not going to a college that doesn't that doesn't support these particular practices.
Yeah, I think you raise a great point too, Jason, in that there is that dichotomy between people who were very disappointed in the decision, maybe not surprised or shocked, but definitely disappointed in it, and those that were like, yay. And when I think about that, I think about, well, those are the people who never understood it in the first place, never really potentially understood the impact and why it was needed, right? Why it is needed. And then also for organizations that might take the slant of like, okay, well, we can diminish DEI efforts now, or we can go what I like to refer to highlight, because they were performative from the very beginning. Their hearts weren't in it from the very beginning, right? Those were the tick the boxes, whether they had consultant or they created a chief diversity officer role within their organizations. I mean, that's the other tangential part of this, is that that's what we saw almost within 24 hours of the SCOTUS decision. Was all of a sudden there were 4 major companies, one of them including Netflix, where their chief diversity officer suddenly either resigned or was let go. And so what does that say about organizations that are very quick to change their tune, change their perspective, or make dramatic changes in the wake of a decision like that? I think it might potentially say something about the depth of their commitment to the work and to the change. I would like to go back. We're getting some questions in, which is exciting. So I thank you everyone who is writing in. So one of the questions, and this comes from Marthy or Marth, I'm not sure. So excuse the pronunciation. We're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. We noticed some progress that is obvious, but there is one expression that bothers her a lot. People of color. Why categorizing a group of people, knowing that in the group said people of color, we have Asian, Black, Spanish. So for Marth or Marthy, this appellation is not worthy. We need to start refusing to be called people of color, because I prefer to be called an African woman or a Black woman. An Asian can recognize as such as well. We cannot be inclusive if people are not identified by what they are. So I'm going to toss that one over to Nicole and Adrian. Would love to hear your perspective on the whole POC that falls into BIPOC as well, and use of these acronyms for different groups.
I'll be really quick. I'm sorry, Nicole, to just jump in. I think it goes back to my evolution of language, right? At the end of the day, and it's some people prefer it, some people don't, and that's okay. You have to, and I think Marth, I think it's great that you say what you prefer to identify as. You don't have to identify as a person of color, right? I think when we're talking about people of color and it becomes this group, I think we're also talking about shared experiences and shared things that intersect within this group of people and the systems and the oppressions and the, but I don't disagree with you. And I don't, I think it's just an evolution of language. Some people are now saying BIPOC. Some people are just saying like you said, they're saying Black and Asian and Hispanic and Latino. And I think it's okay. And I think that, again, it'll start to evolve as more people say, I don't want to necessarily identify as a person of color. And that's okay. And we're allowed to have those discussions, and we're allowed to have those disagreements, because that's what this work is about, is evolving together. And you're not always going to come to a consensus on issues like this. But I think it's a valid question. And I think that, as we move forward, as members of a community, we have to continue to have these discussions and these conversations, because they are important and they're necessary to have with about these things, because they affect us, right?
Yeah.
As quote unquote people of color, they affect us, and if that's not what we want, then we don't have to do it. And that's the great thing about this work. You can move on.
Yeah, there's autonomy and agency in ways that I don't even think we talked about those terms, back when. Even if we were to go back 5 years ago, I don't recall anybody talking about having agency. Nicole.
Yeah, no, Adrian, I was going to start with what you said. It's the evolution of language, right?
Mhm.
If you just look at Negro, colored, Black, there is this wide and has been this spectrum of the way that we choose to define ourselves. And I think it starts with that. It's that self-agency. It's being able to embrace how you define yourself. And I think in particular, living here in Connecticut, I'm from the Midwest, but moving here to Connecticut really helped to open up my eyes to the varying, experiences of West Indian culture. Not being West Indian, I was often asked, so where are you from? When I first moved here. And I said, well, I'm from Chicago. But they'd be like, no, where are you from, right? And
Oh.
recognizing that there is this broad richness of melanated skin. I think that is where we need to allow people to define themselves again, Adrian, as you were saying, as they are. I know Martha, and knowing that her voice was welcomed in this space to even bring that, I think is an illustration, a demonstration of how this conversation can evolve based upon one's perspective. And so I think, again, I would say in 5 years, we'll probably see another iteration. And I think that everyone should be able and should be welcome to, embrace the term of how they choose to define themselves.
I think having agency is important, and I think that's one of the things that often gets lost in this conversation about language. I'm not a linguistic expert, but you do see this type of evolution. The example that everything that you're saying, Ace and Nicole, bring to mind, and it's been well documented here, is the evolution or de-evolution of the phrase Latinx. You had this is a perfect, it's a classic example of, and again, I understand the reasons that the phrase that the word itself was coined, but you had Latinos, Latinas saying, no, we don't want that label, to the point where the Congressional Hispanic Caucus banned the word from their own materials. So yes, I think all language is an evolution, but there are that's something that I don't know if you would have saw that 30 years ago. I don't think you would have.
Can I ask one quick question? I'm sorry. To respond to what Jason is saying, I think it's interesting because what we're talking about really is who gets to label who gets to choose who is putting a term on a group of people. And I think being able to reject a term is just as empowering as it is to define oneself. Thinking about Black and white construct, there are these defined boxes that people try to put others in that really, if you don't want to be in that box, then you should have the right to be able to dismantle that box.
Yeah. And I dare say, flip that box over, stand up and say what you need to say even more. Right. But this is why these conversations are important, and that they can happen in spaces that are not punitive. Right. I think, Ace, I love both your perspective. Jason, you too, the tone of it said, you are welcome to A, feel this way, 2, articulate it, and 3, choose. Right. And I think that is so important, but there are many demographics that don't feel like others should, have those choices for various reasons and agendas. We'll just leave that over there. But also just because that's not the way the system was built, and we are pushing back on the systems, if you will, by asserting our agency and our autonomy and by using our voices in this way. But that's what's required in order to build better what was and what has disenfranchised, what has marginalized and oppressed various demographics for a very long time. I just want to read another question here, something from Dawn. I love what Ace said about how we learn differently. The music video and song by Jason Aldean, Try That in a Small Town. I love that song, Dawn, by the way. It inspired this question: how do we reach people who do not recognize white privilege or white supremacy and lynching? People who we think are injecting these issues into the national and local conversations. Are they reachable? Can we find a way to come together instead of writing them off? I have an answer to that, but Adrian, since it was posed to you, you get the mic.
Well, thank you, Nicole. I'm happy you're from the Midwest because I'm from the South. We are both transplants to this great state of Connecticut. You know, and I don't know, maybe Nicole can agree with me. And I come from a very, predominantly white, not necessarily predominantly white where I come from. That wasn't it. Maybe a caste system, maybe a segregation of sorts and cultures. But there was a lot of anti-Blackness, let's just say that, no matter if there was a 50%, split. And when you're talking when you're speaking of that song, and let me tell you, you'll go back and if you read about it, you'll go find an article, and it's about me driving a red truck, listening to country music. When I was player of the year, and you'll have these dynamics. So with this particular song, and speaking to white supremacy and lynching and all those things, and reaching people, Don, I think you can certainly always try to reach people. I don't think we have the right to give up. I think that we should continue to try to reach as many people as possible. I think that if someone is committed in a way to saying, I don't know if it's a benefit of the doubt thing. This is, and you're bringing up the song. So there's so many things I've read in the last week with this song, and your perception of it, or your lived experiences versus someone else's lived experiences. And with lyrics, music is very telling. And words are very real. And everyone's going to have their own perspective of music and how they see it, perception of it and how they see it. And you can give someone the benefit of the doubt, but they also have to give the other folks the benefit of the doubt when they say that they feel a certain way. And I think what's happening with this particular song and this particular issue is, I come from a small town. I come from where people freely carried guns, right, in the back of their truck because they were hunting or whatever. I come from people who were singing this song loud and proud, and not thinking whatever the controversy is, but also they don't understand what you're saying, Don. I'm sorry, I'm taking way too long to get to my point. Is behind all of that, what that means.
Yes.
They're singing a song and it's catchy and it's great and it's about them and their small town and how they're going to protect each other. And when you're having that conversation with people from small towns, and from my experience, I won't speak to anyone else's, they're talking about everyone in that town. What they're doing though is they are excluding outsiders. And that's a conversation that needs to be had of what is the threat, or who is the threat in these lyrics that you're talking about. And when you can sit down and have a conversation about that, maybe you'll reach, well, that wasn't the threat I was talking about, because you might get to those comments that we all love to hate is, no, my best friend's Black, right? Over here, I'm protecting you. But that, when you come from spaces like that, there's meaning to them. And there's also meaning from the outside looking in going, yeah, that's not cool. And when we're talking about lynching, that's a very specific thing also. When you're talking about lynching, again, people are singing it, not knowing the back story to all of this, not knowing where the video is taped, not knowing what lynching is having done. And that's why we have to have these conversations and point out there was a time where people were hanging from trees and there are postcards, and that's why you cannot ever stop talking about history and about the truth at the end of the day. Or those people who are singing the song and they're singing it because they're proud to be from a small town aren't recognizing, not going to recognize the backlash because they are not educated in what's going on. And that's where we need to really talk about that in our educational system so that they know what's in the background of that song.
Yeah. Can I hop in here just for a quick second?
You should have it.
Thinking about, the last part of that question, can we write them off? What do we do with people who are, in their space, in their experience? And what comes to mind is the movie American History X, right? Where you see this dramatic evolution, right, of someone who is a white supremacist. If you have not seen it, I highly recommend it. You would not know that the movie was made in 97. I think what's important is to recognize that this work starts with relationships, right? It starts with relationships. That is the granular level where when you are able to build relationship, you can then engage in these more difficult conversations, but these conversations that have to be grounded in truth. And so, when I talk about the work that I do, and I talk about the work that really all of us do, the common denominator is relationships. If we can then increase our circles and be able to have a more diverse social circle, we can then get to know people and then be able to engage in these tough conversations. So when that song is brought up, we can engage in a dialogue instead of going at it in a contentious manner in order for us to be able to build a bridge. We have to live in this world together. We've got to try to figure this out. And if we can start to build relationship with people who don't look like us, then we will be able to see the shifts, because now we're taking it down to the basic genetic, get to know each other. Then we can start to see the shift.
Absolutely. Yes. I can agree more.
We talk about music, and what comes to my mind when you're all talking about, and again, I'm not a Jason Aldean fan. I've heard of the song. I don't know the song.
A good teaching tool. It's a good conversation tool.
All right, so go back to basics on something like this. You look at the song Dixie, which was the answer, the South's answer to the Battle Hymn of the Republic. I mean, it was used as a rallying cry for the South during the Civil War. Musically, a lovely little tune. I mean, it's catchy. You could hear it like playing around in your head. It's something that people have whistled for hundreds of years, or 100+ years. There's power in the song, though, and I think that's what people forget. It's more than just a bunch of notes on a piece of paper, and it is more than just a catchy tune that an earworm that's easy to go. The difference there, and I think what you realize there, though, there are people who, if they weren't educated to the origins of the song, if they weren't educated, and if all they know is that, hey, that's what my grandmother sang to me when I was going to sleep at night. That's what my mom sang to me when I was going to sleep at night. That's what my grandfather used to whistle when we were out in the field. That is, those people have a very different. It's an opportunity but
Yeah.
we also acknowledge that they have a very different perspective than somebody like us would. So there's it's songs can be powerful. They definitely can be powerful, but we can also make those powerful agents of change.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think we've all hit on something that's really important, which is sometimes when we look at our differences, right? And we have these, what we think are these stark contrasts, and we have these people who seem like they are zealous about any ism, but we'll just take it as we're discussing right now for racism. And we think that those people just are. What we find, I think, collectively in the work is that we don't know everything that's influenced their perspectives, right? And so, Jason, as you were talking about, you know, people who grow up in small towns and that's just what grandma used to sing. Well, there's also things that grandma used to say. There are also things that maybe you grew up somewhere that was very rural and there wasn't a lot of difference in your community. You didn't experience difference greatly in your youth. Majority of people in your community look like you. Maybe you didn't go to schools where there was a lot of diversity, right? And then you go away to college. There was a study not too long ago that talked about the percentage of people experiencing people that are different from them racially, ethnically, as well as different learning styles, neurodiversity, all of that for the first time when they get to college. So when we think about people bringing all of that lived experience forward into a setting, not only are other people having culture shock in different ways, they're having culture shock. And if they don't have the information and the tools to acclimate into that environment, to understand different experiences, whether that be race or gender, sexual orientation, religions, all of that, they're going to be at a deficit. And they are more likely to say and do something that gets them in hot water because they don't know. Now, we can say that, you know, the internet's available to everyone and everybody has access to information in which they can understand things better. But if you don't know there's an issue with how you think, how you feel, or how you grew up, if you don't see it as being limiting, then guess what? You're not even going to bother go looking at those things, right? It's usually not going to come up until you step in it verbally or you do something that for some people, that is their first point of major awareness. And so I think songs like the one we were referring to with Jason Aldean, I think it provides an opportunity to have that dialogue that Nicole was referring to, right? About like, what does this mean? What this might mean for me as a Black woman is clanging cymbals and rife racism screaming through my ears, but what this might mean from somebody who comes from a community that they didn't have a lot of diversity, etc. And this was played in song and in conversation in their heads and hearts, they might not see anything wrong with it. Nicole, you came off mute.
Yeah, I was just, thinking about those lived experiences that we bring into the workplace, but also thinking about, you've had a huge shift within higher education where you have more and more adult learners coming into these spaces. And so when you think about the 17 and 18-year-old who are coming without a lot of potential exposure because they live wherever their guardians or parents have selected for them to live. Now you have this influx of adult students who are coming into schools like Goodwin. And that's where, Jason talked a lot about education and making sure that we give people the necessary understanding of the historical context in order for people to kind of get a sense. And even that's what you were talking about as well. You may not understand what that symbol represents to one person versus someone else. And I think what we need to be mindful of within the higher ed space, within the education space, is really looking closely at the content of our curriculum in order to ensure that we're not watering it down, that we're not whitewashing it, and that we're creating truth spaces so these conversations can happen. This conversation happens through dialogue, just like what we've all been saying. It takes conversation to be able to kind of unpack some of the misperceptions or the oops or the ouch moments. And so just wanted to kind of just chime in and offer some commentary.
And
Yeah,
I want to, can I piggy?
sure.
Absolutely everything. And this is also something to Yvonne's point, and I tell people that if someone doesn't think something is broken, then they don't know to fix it, right?
There it is.
And also, I want people who are watching and participating, or who will watch this, we are not people without fault on this panel.
Yeah.
We have each stepped in it and had to learn and relearn and continue to do so each and every day. And I like to put that out there because I don't want to be an expert in anything. I don't want to be above anyone. I don't want to be termed as an elitist. It's what's happening, what we've been doing in our spaces is every day we go in to learn. And I will speak for everyone. Every day is a day for us to learn, because you cannot be in this work, in this space. You cannot run organizations if you're not willing to learn each and every day from the people who are around you. And when you can have these conversations, and yes, they can be controversial or uncomfortable, but when you can have that dialogue, as Nicole was saying, and you can talk and be factual and truthful and authentic in those conversations, that's when change starts to happen. And when you have a conversation around something like this and it gets blown up, you have to also come with grace in your heart.
Yes. Oh, thank you for the G word. Yes.
Because
Yes.
if you don't have that and you're not willing to give it, then you can't have that expectation of others.
Amen.
All right.
Well
Ab-
stated. Well
No,
stated.
Yes.
Thank you for
absolutely.
that.
And I mean, Ace, I agree completely. I think that you know, one of the perspectives that I bring to this is that of in my background is as a political scientist and teaching American government to the next generation. And by the way, you know, we could spend another hour and a half here talking about how I have seen my own students at Central Connecticut State University and the University of Connecticut shift over the last 16, 17 years that I've been teaching. So in a good way, by the way. I mean, you definitely see those shifts. I think and again, I'm not trying to play the pessimist here. I think what we have to remember is that while we can all be warriors in this effort on the ground, and we can all do this, we have to remember there is at least as equal of an army that is trying to do the opposite. And you look at where a lot of these problems come in, and you can root everything back to the fights over the 3/5 compromise in the Constitution. You can go back to the Civil War. You can go back to the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act in the mid-1960s. But the truth is, there are also people whose power, money, and at times livelihood are tied to trying to do the opposite of what we're trying to do here on this call. It's not about educating. It's not about grace. It's about telling people, hey, this is why your life sucks right now, and this is who did it to you. And how do we continue to perpetuate that theory among people? That right there, unfortunately, is the reality of American politics in the year 2023. I mean, we are, for better or worse, we are a democracy. The great thing about American democracy is all you have to do is be 18 and breathing in order to vote. And the worst thing about American democracy is all you have to do is be 18 and breathing in order to vote. You don't have to have grace in your heart in order to vote. You can have hate in your heart. Hate is a major motivator in politics. And all the things we've talked about here today, from Supreme Court decisions to civil justice and other things, where does it stem from? It stems from this idea of democracy, and that and Barack Obama said it best: elections have consequences. Why did the Supreme Court make their decision to decide what they did on affirmative action? Because the makeup of the Supreme Court and the balance of the Supreme Court was determined by the outcome of the 2016 election. Let's put that out there. That's fact. That's not a disputable. I mean, again, you may agree or disagree with what the ultimate outcome was, but that is fact. And I think until we start just deconstructing what other people have constructed, people benefit politically from trying to distill these things into these mutually exclusive choices in which there is a winner and in which there is a loser. And you are the loser because this person is the winner because of X, Y, and Z. Therefore, get angry, go out and vote for me. We need to find a way to deconstruct that in this country. And when I use the word warriors before, we have to be warriors because the other side are warriors too. They're trying to preserve their status quo. They're trying to preserve what they have known for 247 years. I get it. I get the human nature piece of it, but we have to be warriors in opposition to that.
Well, Jason, and I love that you teach political science over there. It's beyond the 247 years.
Yes, absolutely.
We're talking into colonialism and imperialism and all those things. This is beyond just the establishment of the United States of America. And I think that we need to have that conversation also because we have folks who are still being oppressed, ignored, and voices that are happening within our communities and within our own state and across whether they're recognized or unrecognized based on their background and their identity of being Indigenous. So this is beyond just the civil rights, civil war, or 3/5 compromise, or any sort of court decision. We have to really, again, and I will go back to say, history is important. And if we're not having those conversations and we're not really digging deep into how history is told and whose perspective it's told from, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to get anywhere in politics if we continue to ignore that, because we can deconstruct or disrupt systems all we want, but people can still, if they don't know the history of why this is happening and don't want to know the history or believe whatever made up history they think is true, that we have bigger issues as a country and as a nation and as a world, because it's happening more than just in the United States of America. This conversation is global, and we need to think about that and put that at the forefront also.
Yeah. Well, it is 1:27 and I can't believe it because this has been such an amazing, rich conversation that, I mean, everybody was dropping all the gems. And I think it was one of the richest conversations that I think I have had in a panel function like this in a really long time. And when I said the brilliance part and the hearts part from the very beginning, I knew what I knew, and you all proved that out here today. So thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for being on the front lines, not being afraid to have the necessary conversations to bring out the necessary facts, information, and truly what we are all living in right now in some form or fashion. And so I look forward to the next opportunity to have you all on from the entire crew at West Hartford Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Minority Business Network. We thank you, and we hope for our audience that you learned a lot, you leaned in more perhaps than you anticipated, and that you walk away with a perspective and a focus towards change, because we can all be a part of it. And so let's get about that business. All right. So thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Chamber, for having us. And thank you, Jason. Cole, you guys are wonderful. And I have so much respect for the both of you. And you, obviously, Yvonne. Yvonne, I have so much respect for you.
This was great. You can do it anytime.
All right. Remember that when I come a-calling. Excellent. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Have a good day.
All right. Are we still live, Kate?
Always
Are
live.
we? Oh, we're done.